Hello and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Shaking It Up. I'm your host today, James McNeil, and we're just excited and delighted to have you join us today. We're talking about a contemporary subject. One that's kind of a little different. We call it the invited guest, and we'll let you know what that is about a little bit later in the program. But I brought some friends with me to join me on this panel. And so I will start off to my far right. Alex. Go ahead, introduce yourself, Alex.
Hello, Alex Whitening here.
Hi, I'm Joanne Mothersill.
And my name is Quan Bowen.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so, just so glad that you all could join me. Today's actually a nice day here in Tampa, Florida. And so, let's go ahead and just kind of jump into this. First of all, how have you all been doing so far this year in 2021? How's it been? Quan?
Blessed and highly favored. I mean, it's been an eventful year so far, but we're still here, and this year seems to be a little bit more promising, obviously, than it was in the past. So I'm grateful to God for that. What else?
All right. Great, great. And Alex, I know that you've had some changes this year, haven't you?
A small one. Take my mask off. You know, having a son, born in May 28th, it's been a real big change. No sleep, but it's worth it. Working in the school system, having a lot of changes, being placed at different schools, and having to have my hand in just a lot of different things. I'm here, so I'm glad I'm here, and pray for those who aren't here. Pray for those family members who aren't here.
Amen. Amen. And Jolanne, I know you've had some changes as well.
Yes, definitely. 2021 has been a year of redefining and refocusing on my purpose. So that really has been what it has been for me.
Good. And that's it. I mean, you can't talk about the last year or so without talking about change, loss, confusion. It's just been one of those things that it seems like every time you turn around and look, something else has happened. It's like, oh boy, here we go. I think, and I hate to keep backtracking, but 2020 was very promising. I mean, it started off pretty good, and then it didn't turn out so well. And so during that time, I know for me there were a lot of changes personally, professionally, spiritually even. And so it had me reflecting and thinking. And it's something that I don't think as a young person I ever really thought I would ever have to experience so much. I mean, you hear old people talking about it, the back in the day, in my day, things were like this and like that. And you're like, yeah, whatever. And then it happens. And so it threw me off. So one of the things I want to throw out to you all right now is what are some of the things that you did to cope with the change or the changes in your life in the past year?
Well, I would think that first, talking about the coping mechanism, backtracking to 2020, I mean, as we said, it's promising. Last year was my first year in college. It was also my first job. I mean, things were supposed to be big and exciting. Then you get an email from your school that says you have to stay home. It's your first, all these rapid things that are changing. It's my first year. You haven't started doing any clubs yet. You haven't started experiencing campus life. You're just being around new people. Even at church, we did have very promising different changes. But then all of a sudden, that gets shut down, and you have to stay home. And one of the coping mechanisms I would think is staying alone, being secluded by yourself. Not everyone can stay by themselves for long periods of time, nor can they with others. But the coping mechanism, I think it was just constant prayer, supplication to God during that time, not only for yourself, but through others. And some of those activities that we still found that we could do even from virtual spaces, that we just beckon to each other saying that, hey, I know that you're there. Those small hints of human touches, that though small, it was able to bring us through the drastic time that we were in.
Oh, very detailed, Quan. I appreciate that. How about Alex, Joel Ann? What were some of the coping mechanisms that you used, or what are the things that you did to deal with loss and the change?
Well, for me, the very beginning was awesome. The introvert in me absolutely loved being at home and not having to, the pressure of having to go out to do networking events and all of that other good stuff. But after a while, it still gets to you. So for me, I prioritized connecting, right? Not just to do activities, but having meaningful connections. I ended up with a group of ladies on Facebook that we ended up starting just meeting virtually on Zoom every Sunday night, just to kind of check in with each other, see how everything's going, and it started last April. And we've been going strong ever since. We've formed really, really great friendships. These are people that I can call on when I'm having a bad day and have them pray for me. These are also people that celebrate my wins with me, so they've become family. So for me, one of my coping mechanisms is just making sure that I'm staying connected. Yes, you're still kind of being isolated, but you can find other ways of being able to connect with others. And so that's been really, really helpful for me.
Oh, wow. I like what you said there. Meaningful connection, intentional connection. I think that is important, especially when you are isolated, especially when, once again, you're dealing with change. And you said you're an introvert. And so definitely an intentional connection or an intentional way of making sure that you are taking care of yourself is important. Alex, how about you?
I would say 2020 started off kind of rough. The death of my uncle. And on the day of his funeral, Kobe Bryant died. It was pretty rough.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Pretty rough. But I would say working at a high school, I can remember the day before spring break started, we had an open gym. And I remember we got emails and phone calls like, we're going to push the return to school back 1 week. Then 1 week turned into a month. Then a month turned into the remainder of the year. And we had to make phone calls to kids almost on a daily basis, which, for me, I really was never isolated because I had to, through Zoom, having Zoom meetings every day, making phone calls every day, reaching out to parents, reaching out to kids. And it wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst. I think my coping mechanism was just being busy and being available for others if they needed to talk. But being at home 24/7 definitely wasn't the best. But we made it through. We're in 2020 to 21. So, I mean, it's rough. You hear stories about, back in 1918 this happened, and you never think it'll happen now. And now when we're literally living through it, it's kind of just like, this is going to go down in history. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like you kind of stayed busy as well with your work, your job.
Not voluntarily, but yeah. I mean, you just had a lot of kids who were just contemplating suicide and didn't know where to go. A lot of kids running away and having to find them and go to people's. I didn't go to anyone's house. My wife was my excuse why I couldn't go, but
it's a good excuse. Good excuse.
Then when the next school year started, then it was just pandemonium, kids not being found, kids where A students working online become D students. It just hurts the kids and the students more so, I believe. So I think it's like, as an adult and as a growing adult, I think it's easier. But for students who live in the house with parents and siblings having to do work online and not being able to be in the classroom, I think it definitely hurts them a lot and pushes them into a corner they probably don't want to be in.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting you mentioned that because I think, I would say statistics, but one of the things that they noticed was that there were a lot of educational delays as a result of the pandemic for students. So some of the challenges, and that's probably a separate episode because, technology has been available, I think, for so long in terms of education, school, even church. But it was only 2020 that you really saw a massive overhaul and push towards that. E-learning has always been around. But with that being said, just trying to get a better sense of, who you are, your identity. I mean, this was once again a major event that's going to be in the record books. And then as we're going out into, as we're here in 2021, what changes have you noticed? What have you noticed about yourself as a result of what you experienced in 2020? Anyone?
I've learned about myself that I can cope with a lot. Having to go to a new school last year, I want to say in my classroom, there were probably around 3 or 4 COVID outbreaks from the same kid. And teachers were moving in, just pandemonium. But, when the kids are involved, you have to stay calm, you have to stay poised. And, kids were having to get sent home almost on a daily basis. Was very, not terrifying for me because I had already been through 2020. But when 2021 came, it was just seeing myself not panic was kind of one thing that I kind of saw myself growing. I see myself not getting as angry as much as I used to in other years. I think just 2021 has just brought out a spirit of just giving it all to God and just praying for my steps to be ordered, I think. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for that.
Anytime.
Anyone else? What have you learned?
I could say for me, what I've noticed for 2021 for me is that I'm more intentional about where and how I spend my time and my energy. Just because 2020 taught me, even though you kind of know it, because we all say it, like nothing's promised, things can change just like that. And I don't want to live a life of regrets. So in order for me to make sure that I have no regrets, or as little as possible, I have to be intentional about how I'm spending my time and how I'm spending my energy. Who's getting my time? Who's getting my energy? Is it something that is purposeful? Is it something that is meaningful to me? And just making sure that I'm doing more of that. And that in turn has just brought a level of internal peace as well as just another connection with God, because I'm more intentional about the time that I spend with God. So it's just brought me closer with that. So yeah, I could say that that's the biggest difference transferring from 2020 into 2021 for me.
That's a good skill. I would add to be intentional. I think oftentimes we have so much that we have going on that we don't always recognize that you've got to make space for the things that are important. We just kind of assume that that's the case. And I think what you said is very important, because I think it's a life lesson that transfers no matter how old you are, that you've got to prioritize and make it count for that day, for that week, for that month. Quan, how about you?
Well, I would say, just to piggyback off of a little bit of what was said before, what I've learned about myself as a student is that a lot of things in the surrounding environment assist in learning. Like the temperature of the AC can throw you off. I mean, the corny jokes that the professor tell actually assist in your learning. They help you remember stuff later on. And so it's not just straightforward pencil to notebook and marker to whiteboard. It's so much more. You know, you have friends, I don't want to say roast, but we joke around and hold each other accountable, and so much more, the laughs that we share, the community that you find yourself in, and the niche also that you do. So a lot of I'm finding that a lot of things that aren't do assist in making the person that you are, and you become more appreciative of those small things that used to be that are no longer.
Wow, Kwan, once again, you never fail to disappoint. Oh man, you know, this is rich, and I love having this conversation, partially because I think oftentimes, you know, as Christians, believers, we really expect to have adversity, but most of the time we talk about the good times, right? We, you know, hear sermons on it, and we know that bad times come, but when it actually does come, it can throw you for a loop, and it can knock you off your feet. You know, not without getting into specifics, but there are some losses I've had personally that have really kind of taken my breath away and really just had me scratching my head. And when you have those losses, it causes you to evaluate everything, being intentional. Are you connecting? Are you making sure your relationship is steady with God? Because it's not if crisis comes, it's when crisis comes, right? Am I right on that?
Absolutely.
And so really the idea is to prepare yourself for the crisis. But then also too, as you prepare for our crisis, there's some things that you just can't prepare for. You know, there's some people that, you know, I dearly loved that passed away last year, and actually in previous years. And it was hard. It was hard, at least from my perspective, to kind of shake that. And so it had me thinking a lot about, you know, who am I? Have any of you all had some of that experience? And what was helpful for you?
Well, while I was working as a hospice nurse, I definitely noticed that there was a difference in the way that people were dying. I'm sorry for kind of giggling because it might seem a little morbid, but the people who had no regrets, right? The people who took all the chances and did all the things that they wanted to do and went after their dreams, they seem to have an easier time transitioning than the ones who were, I wish I were able to and I should have, right? So that got me questioning, well, how am I going to die? How do I want to die? Do I want to die with regrets? Or do I want to, if I have the opportunity of having, you know, a natural death, to be able to say, yes, you know what, I've lived, I've done what I needed to do. And that is kind of what started, you know, the catalyst for me to start prioritizing not just my physical health, but also my mental health. It also led me on the journey to start kind of figuring out what exactly my purpose is so that I can live through that. And it also drove me to want to start to form a more meaningful connection with God, not just okay, I'm coming to church every week and I'm reading my Bible and I'm doing the ritualistic praying and I'm following all of the commandments, about that kind of thing, but to be able to have the kind of relationship where I hear him clearly because he's the one that's going to help me, to guide me to figure out what my purpose is, right? Because he's the one who created me and he created me for a purpose. So who better to go to figure out what that is? Right? You buy a kitchen gadget that you're going to use, the manufacturer sends instructions on how for you to use them. So that kind of put me in a state of where I'm going to go back to the manufacturer, which is God, get connected with him so that I know what purpose I'm here for and how I could be used for that. So that was how being faced with mortality, because as a hospice nurse, I've seen my fair share of people leave this earth, and you're faced with it, right? Like, how am I going to? Am I ready to? Do I want to? So that helped me to kind of put things in line and to kind of create a different path, so to speak, or
Okay.
more defined path for
Okay.
myself, so to speak.
Like it. Alex, you were about to say something?
I was. I would say last year. Was it last year? No, this year. I left my previous school in February 2021, and one of our students was killed. Was in a car and someone was shooting and he got shot.
Wow.
Me and a previous employee of mine at the school, we went to the wake, and we saw so many students that were coping with it at the same time, and they were very much sorrowful for his death. And maybe a week later, another student had ended up, someone killed his brother. He ended up shooting and killing someone and went away to prison for life.
Oh my
And me and this
gosh.
student were very, very close. And it's kind of like you see both sides of it. You see the one where you'll never see this student again, but his family is going to miss him because he's gone. But then you see this side, this guy's going to be gone in prison for life. He's still here, but his family doesn't have the opportunity to see him as they want. They probably have to visit. And it just puts in consideration that sometimes you may have to think things out for some people. Some people may need help, like kids, they may not have everything they need at home. So it made me think, was I doing everything I could? So it's like every time I'm with the student, I make sure I do everything. Once I get them annoyed, I know I'm doing something right. I'm touching something, so I just make sure I tell them everything, right, wrong, what could happen, what may not happen, but just being intentional with the children, I think helps a lot, goes a long way.
Like that. Appreciate that, Alex. Wow, what a powerful story. Quan, did you have anything to add?
Well, just one thing I think that I would add. I know someone, she was actually my preschool teacher. She passed away during last year. Her family, her mother was in Florida. She was in Jamaica. She passed away. They couldn't go to the funeral because of the restrictions. And a couple weeks later, her mother passed away.
Oh, wow.
So family from Jamaica could not come to America to do the same. So I was just thinking about the effect, also on myself, because she was a Christian. We were neighbors and we went to the same church. So she had a huge impact on me. So it also has, you'd think about the impact that it has on family members, all the other people that touch. Some of us, and I know there were hundreds of cases, you'd have to go up to the hospital window. You can't see them for their final days. So it does have that great of an impact, and also a reflective impact where you appreciate the time that you spent with them before.
Indeed. And man, talking about how much life changes, and sometimes you don't realize just how much limited time that you have with someone. And you're right, talking about family members seeing their loved ones through a window. It's like something out of a bad movie or a nightmare someone's having. And yet that was the reality for many. And so it caused, I know it definitely caused a lot of challenges and stress, but not just the families, but those who are involved as well. The healthcare workers, I can only, I remember reading a story about a grocery grocery store clerk, and she had been working, it said like 12 hours. And read the article. Basically, she was being verbally abused by everybody at the store. Because you remember the grocery stores, folks were just stocking up on toilet paper like it was no tomorrow, stocking up on all kinds of stuff. And this poor young girl, after her shift, went outside into the parking lot and just bursted up in tears and just cried and cried and cried and cried because the stress was so heavy. And I thought to myself, how is it that we can get to such a point where we are so self-absorbed that we're not thinking about how other people are feeling? It's just a thought. Now, we know that the Bible gives us a lot of words, a lot of advice dealing with that. But one of the stories that has always struck me as not only powerful, but also too perplexing is that story of Job. Everybody knows the story of Job. Everybody reads the story of Job. You even have atheist politicians that know the story of Job because it's such a common story. But one of the things in the story of Job is that he had a ton of loss all at once. The Bible tells us that the devil and God basically had a conversation, and Job was put to the test. And there you find in the story of Job where he goes through everything, loses cattle, loses family members, loses it all, and then on top of that, his health is attacked. But then not only is his health attacked, then he has friends come by and speak to him. And these friends, the Bible says they waited about a week before they opened up. But when they opened up, they didn't have anything nice to say. In fact, if anything, they accused him more for being the reason why he was in trouble. I find it perplexing because the reader has the idea or gets the sense that Job is being put to the test because we are able to see behind the scenes. But Job does not know this backstory. He's just dealing with it. And oftentimes there are many of us who are just dealing with it. And I would say many are not dealing with it well. One of the things that happens when you have a lot of loss, when you have death, when you have changes that you did not expect, one is depression. Would you agree? Depression would begin to seep in. Maybe a sense of abandonment. Maybe a question of faith or doubt.
Anger, resentment.
Anger, resentment. Any other ones?
Guilt.
Guilt. Now that one's pretty powerful. That one's pretty powerful. Now, when you say guilt, what do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of times we tend to take on or take responsibility for things that we have no control over, right? So we start to feel guilty, right? Maybe I didn't pray enough, or, if I had done this better, or I should have done that better, or that kind of thing. And it's very easy to fall into that trap, right? Because then the guilt is always because we're blaming ourselves for something, right? And if we're always looking for somebody or something to blame. So if we're not blaming ourselves, we're blaming somebody else. But when there's not somebody else readily available for us to blame, we always turn the blame on ourselves and in turn start feeling guilty for things that we probably have no business feeling guilty over because we have absolutely no control over it. What I love about the story of Job is he didn't know what was going on, but I think his resilience was a testament of his character, right? I think there's
resilience. That's a big word. You're gonna have to help me out there. What do you mean by resilience?
Well, I mean, the ability to just stand firm in what he believed and who he was, even though he had his friends coming and saying, why don't you just curse God and die? He's just like, no, I believe in him. I believe in who he is. I don't understand what's going on in this moment, but I trust who he is. So I'm going to hold on and I'm not going to curse him, right? So it even though he had all those trials, he didn't understand it. But it didn't shake who he was at his core. And I think a lot of times that's what happens with us when we have different things that get thrown at us in life. It reveals or uncovers our true nature and our true character with that. And I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah, I like the story of that with guilt, right? Because Job could have started feeling guilty when his friends came to him and said, well, it's your fault, it's because you believe in God or whatever, right? And he could have turned that guilt into, well, you know what, yeah, maybe I shouldn't. But he didn't take on that guilt because he knew that it wasn't his responsibility. No, he wasn't sure why everything was happening, but he knew that it wasn't his responsibility and he didn't take on that. So that's probably one of the reasons he was able to keep his sanity, where a lot of us probably would have lost our minds if we had the experience that Job did.
Interesting indeed. Interesting. You know, and it really lends to the point that even in the story of Job, right? What was God's response to Job? Because at one point, Job did just get frustrated and just started screaming out, you know, I want an audience with God, right? He says, I want, if I could just talk to the Almighty and plead my case. Because from Job's perspective, he did nothing wrong. Did God, first of all, answer his question? What do you all recall about that story? I guess I should have asked that first. What do y'all recall? What was God's answer as to why this was happening to Job? Alex, Quan, you guys are biblical scholars.
Wasn't it because it was one of his? Because God, I mean, I don't want to say God bragged, but it seemed like God did kind of like brag in a little way to Satan a little bit. I want to say a little, maybe.
Well, he did.
But he said,
point
"Try
him
my
out.
good and faithful servant."
I mean, he did point him out, but what did God tell Job in terms of why this happened to him?
I'm gonna pass that one to you.
Okay.
Maybe Quan.
Quan?
Oh, no, I left the biblical knowledge.
Oh,
in
okay.
The car, so
You left it, but okay.
You have to enlighten
Yeah,
us
that's
on
that.
that one.
I'm sorry.
I just remember a tornado coming.
I know
A tornado
context.
did come.
Yep. So one of the things, and you know, this is funny, because there's a song by Mali Music that talks about the story of Job. You can look it up on YouTube. But one of the things that's very interesting is that Job never gets an answer to why it's happened to him.
And that's why we didn't remember it.
God
no
never answers the question. What God does is ask Job more questions and ask him harder, higher level questions that Job could never understand. Everything from nature to being able to deal with forces of evil through imagery. Job never gets an answer. And it's well, go ahead.
He kind of did get an answer.
Huh?
I said he kind of did get an answer.
How so?
If you kept asking him higher questions, I would basically assume it's beyond my understanding of why.
And that's what Job said. It's beyond my understanding. It's beyond my understanding. Go ahead, Joanne. I think you were about to say something.
I was about to ask a question, though. Isn't that the way that it is with life for most of us? There are so many things that happen that are beyond our control, but are also beyond our understanding, right?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
So even though for us it might not be as severe as Job, do we allow the things that are beyond our understanding to shake our faith?
That's a good question. I would ask our studio audience to answer that question, both in the studio and online.
Right in the comments.
Right in the comments on the YouTube. Go ahead, Quan.
Perhaps the reasoning would be that we don't understand it there, and thus you won't be able to control it. That's per se. However, we are human, and we do try to control everything around us. Pencil, paper, people. We like to control others around us, their reaction to whatever we do. So leaving up to our understanding, and that's what I think God is trying to say. It's not for you to to understand it, you're not going to control it. You're not going to mess up my plan that I've had outlaid for you, because it's great. It's much greater than you could ever control.
Indeed, indeed. And, Job is the easy example because it's one that does not have answers. I like what the wise man Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. He says, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away. And it keeps going on about time, but you think you get the point. There is a counterbalance, or as I heard the Jewish people call it, tension in life that happens. And that is that for every good thing that happens, you can expect that there's something bad that is going to happen. Once again, not a matter of if, but when. And so the wisdom is that you enjoy the time that you have to dance and to celebrate, because there will be a time to mourn. It's a perspective, I think, that we would all do well to remember that. Nobody stays on top forever, and no one stays down forever. And this world is chaos. There is a lot of counterbalances. We trust God that He is fixing it, as the old folks would say. But with that, we also, too, want to transition a little bit, because the uninvited guest that we often do not think about is one that is called grief. The uninvited guest that we often deal with is grief. And if you think about that, how many of you have ever asked grief to come into your life? And how many of you told grief to leave? I mean, you may have told it, but did it leave? Did it follow your directions? Grief is the uninvited guest. It's the guest that keeps coming back over and over, even though you don't want that guest to come. And it will stay for as long as it needs to. Grief affects everyone, rich or poor, old or young, educated, uneducated. You pick a demographic, grief touches it all. And so let me just take a look here at our YouTube comments and the chat here. Let's see. The question was, do you want to be a Job?
No, I wouldn't volunteer. No. I'm not signing up for that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I laugh about that because I double that sentiment. No. Now, Alex and Quan probably might, because they seem like strong people who can handle that.
I'd rather be Jonah than Job.
You'd rather be Jonah?
Yeah, I'd rather be Jonah than Job.
Yep.
I was thinking it would probably be easier. I don't know, to be like I guess that's a challenge, to die for Christ or to struggle in life for Him. So I would have to think. I'd have to think about. But I get the premise. The premise is who is going to be steadfast in hope and trust in God, while you go through the tempestuous waves that you do have to go through for His sake. Just recognize that, the Bible says, blessed are those that mourn, for they will be comforted. So if you do end up mourning, and if you believe in Christ, you have the assurance that He will comfort you. So I'll leave it at that.
Indeed, indeed. We'll be comforted. You know, that makes me think that the church has a role to play in that comfort, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
But what role do you think, as believers, do we play?
Okay, I think it would have to go down to an individual level.
Okay.
As each, I don't like to think of the church as, the four walls and the benches. I would, and that necessarily that we need to come up with some sort of program and de-emotionalize the things that we're going through. But we're all human, and we know what grief is. So if we are the church, somebody shouldn't have to ask, can I be comforted? You would automatically be gravitated towards that person, and you would already be beside them, comforting them, because we all experience it. It's nothing being hidden. So you would automatically already be in the midst. I would say we are our brother's keepers, and we should never come to a state where anyone is hiding anything from us. Because if we are brothers keepers, Christ is going to ask us, where's your brother? Were you not attending to him? And we would like for individuals to comfort us in our period of mourning. So as a church, as just a human being, as a collective group of people, we would always be there for ourselves and those that we seek to bring in.
Indeed. Go ahead.
If I could go ahead and answer that, I think the role that the church plays in helping its parishioners with grief is, first of all, understanding what grief is, right? Because a lot of us tend to think that grief deals only with death. When we hear grief, we think mourning, right? But the truth of the matter is there are over 40 life events that we grieve. It's not just death, right? The definition of grief that I have come to love, and because it encompasses it for me, is grief is the conflicting emotions or conflicting feelings that arise as a result of the end or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior.
Okay.
Right? So looking at it from that perspective, the entire world is in a state of grief right now because of the pandemic, because everything is changed.
Right.
Everything is different. Nothing is the way that it's supposed to be, right? Nothing is the way that it was. So we're all grappling and dealing with these changes, right? So when you consider grief, it's not just deep sorrow or mourning or sadness, right? It can be anger.
Right.
That someone killed my brother. It could be anger that now I have to be doing all of these things online and I'm not able to go out. It could be sadness, absolutely. It could also be regret. It could be despair. It could be feeling like you're being abandoned because the person who used to be there for you is no longer there. They're physically still on this earth, but you don't have that support anymore. So once we can recognize and understand what grief is and how it shows up, then we are better able to serve our fellow brothers and sisters and stand in the gap for them when they need it, right? Because it's not just when a loved one passes that I need someone to stand in the gap for me. I need you to stand in the gap for me when I just got married and I'm having a hard time figuring out how to share a life with this new person, right? It's supposed to be this wonderful, joyous event, but there are some little nuances that we got to learn when you're sharing a life with a person, right? Grief is also understanding that I just gave birth and I'm a new mom or a new father, and I need to learn how to take care of this person and be able to express to you whether it's my frustration or the fact that I feel inadequate without you judging me about that, right? Understand that this is something that I'm experiencing and stand in the gap for me in that, right? When we recognize and we understand what it is and how it shows up, then we are better able to serve and to be there for our brothers and sisters. So I think that that's our role. define it, call it by its name, understand what it is, don't be afraid of it, don't run away from it, understand that it's a natural part of the human experience, right? We all are going to lose something at some point in time. We're all going to experience the loss. So just give ourselves grace. Extend the grace to your brothers and sisters, but also give yourself the grace for not being able to do what you think it is that you're supposed to be doing, or for being ignorant of the fact that you didn't recognize that, wow, this is just this person grieving and just manifesting in a different way than I do.
Right, right. Now, you touched on a lot of great points, and I wish we had more time to chew on each and every one of those. But I think the overall thing is that life not only changes, but we grieve each change. I see Alex chomping at the bit there, so I'm gonna allow Alex a moment to weigh in.
Much appreciated. All I was saying is that grief can be major. It could be minor. It could be small. But grief is grief. I tend to grieve about Sabbath sometimes. About my son, newly born. My son.
What's his name?
3 months. Jace Asher Whitening. You know, last year I was still in my routine of waking up on Sabbath and having my clothes out and making a ride. You know, it kind of coming to church is kind of like a family reunion. It's fun. You go to different churches, you see people you haven't seen. It's fun. So it's kind of like there's kind of a standstill. And it's kind of like, what about Jace? Is Jace going to be able to enjoy that and see his little friends? And sometimes I'm just looking at him, he's laughing, and I'm like, oh, you're laughing. You don't even know the half. But, that's just me being silly. So then I have to shake myself out of it and take it for what it is. And every Sabbath we watch, church. I mean, he seems like he understands, but, he just laughs. But, I thank God, 'cause I know God talks to him every day and puts that smile on his face. And I think soon we might get back to where we were, but I'm not placing all my marbles on it. Change is good, and I feel as though we're here. There's something in store for us that we have no idea that it's going to be present when it's present, and that's grief will leave when it leaves. That's how I feel about it.
Okay. I appreciate that perspective, Alex. New husband, new father. Look at that, man. You're a big ball of grief right now, aren't you? New school.
Not at all.
And that's the other thing too, is that grief does not have to be ugly. I often counsel people through some of these processes, and I'm sure Joanne will agree with me, is that reminding people that going through the stages of grief, the cycles of grief, is important because it allows for healing. That is the end goal of any change, is that there's healing. Just as bones break, or bones and muscles, they tear so that they can grow new ones, we have to go through the process of grief so that we can be better on the other side. We can be stronger, we can be wiser. I want us to take a look, if they would just put up some slides for me. Want us to take a look real quick at a few things, because I definitely want us to touch on this. And that is that I'd like us to think about the words that we use. We want to use words of comfort to people who are going through grief. It could be a divorce. It could be a miscarriage. It could be a loss of a job. It could be a death of a loved one. Your words matter. And oftentimes people are just like, get over it. Or, oh, that's so bad. God has something better in store. And that may very well be the case. It sure doesn't feel like it when you're going through it at the time. So instead of trying to make that person feel better, how about joining and accompanying them where they are? Using your words to actually encourage. Things like, what are you feeling today? How can I help you? How can I help you? And sometimes people don't know. They'll be honest. They don't know what to say. One phrase I like to use is, I don't have any idea what that is like for you. Can you tell me? And so this gives you an opportunity, or gives them an opportunity to tell you how they're feeling and where they are. Sometimes when you're going through it, You know what it is. You just don't have words that make sense, and you can't put them and you can't articulate them. So it comes off all crazy. It comes off sideways because honestly, you've gone through a traumatic, emotional, traumatic experience at times. You've been beat up. Another phrase is "tell me more," or "would you like tissue?" Hopefully, you've stocked up on tissue by that point. And so you have something that you can share with others.
The other thing is sometimes silence is golden.
Yes.
Right? A lot of times we are so uncomfortable with the silence that we forget that sometimes we just don't need words being said. Just being there and being a shoulder to cry on is helpful. Another thing is, what I find helpful if you need anything, let me know. When someone is in the middle of going through it, they're not gonna half the time remember to call you if they need something. So if you really, really, truly want to be helpful, a better thing to do would be to say, be pointed with your questions. You call, hey, I'm out grocery shopping right now and I'm gonna stop by and visit. Can I get you anything, right? Do you need anything from the grocery store? Can I pick up an extra gallon of milk for you? No, I don't have to come inside. I'll just leave it by the door for you, just so you know I'm thinking of you, right? Have you eaten today? Can I pick something up for you? Do you need me to take your dog for a walk? Can I come over and babysit the kids for you so you have some time, right? We all know that there's something that we can offer to help instead of the blanket, call me if you need anything, right? And then the other part of that is if you say you're going to do something for somebody while they're going through it, please follow through.
Right.
Please follow through.
Right.
Don't make promises and say, I'm going to do this thing, and then you don't show up. Or worse, you do the blanket, call me if you need anything, and that person calls, and then you don't pick up, right? So say what you mean what you say, and then also remember that sometimes silence is golden.
Indeed. Thank you for that. By the way, what do you do, Joanne? Just so our audience knows. I don't think when you introduced yourself, you didn't say what you did.
No, well, I'm a certified life coach and a certified grief recovery method specialist, as well as a former hospice nurse. So, yeah. So
you just are really fun at parties then.
I can be.
Indeed. If you put those slides, real quickly, I wanted to make sure we talk about the words of caution, because I thought you touched on something I thought that was very important. If you slide down to the words of caution, next two slides, keep going. Yes, just know that your words have power, but be careful also not to withdraw from people completely. One of the things I found reading an article in Adventist News some years ago was that people who had left the church not because of the doctrines or because of the practices, but one of the things that they left was when they had major life changes in their life, people withdrew away from them. And they did not feel that the people were compassionate to them or were there for them when they needed them the most. And so someone who is grieving, someone who's going through a change, needs somebody to be there for support. God, that's what God did. That's what God does for each and every one of us. He's there with us when we need him the most. But also, too, don't compare your grief to somebody else's grief. Just like no two snowflakes are alike, life. No two snowflakes are alike. No two fingerprints are alike. Everybody grieves differently, and they've got a process that they're going through. And so, be patient and be kind. And then don't tell them how they should feel. It's been 6 months. You should get over it by now. It's time for you to start dating. I have a friend of mine, when he lost his spouse, people were trying to hook him up with widows and with other people so that, he could get over his grief. That's not helpful. That is wrong. That is putting salt on a big wound. And so don't do that. Next slide, please. Next one. Here we go. And there's some resources that are available to you locally, whether it's your work employee assistance program, your employer pays money into this, and so when you need time to talk to someone, they will allow you to go do that free of charge, and nobody has to know. Even reaching out to local hospices when you're grieving is helpful, because they often have a bereavement program of some sort, no matter where you are. I know here locally we have LifePath, and so they do have a bereavement department that helps people process and work through their grief, as well as Suncoast and Pinellas County, but any local hospice. There's programs that some churches have called Grief Share, and they get around with people who are also going through difficult losses and challenges, and they go through sometimes I think it's a 8 to 10 week program, and they discuss it. There are plenty of resources online, whether you're a veteran. The Veterans Administration has opportunities and the things that they offer. The 211 Crisis Center is available if you feel suicidal, you want to end your life, or you feel like you just can't take it anymore. You reach out to them, and they'll put you in touch with a crisis specialist. Licensed mental health counselors. I've spoken to several. You want to talk about a tough job? Licensed mental health counselors and social workers during this pandemic have been the most stressed and the most overworked, because everybody. Go ahead.
There you go, comparing griefs.
There I go comparing griefs. You're right. You're right. But talking to them, they have felt the brunt of it, and many of them have struggled to find someone to talk to when they've been overworked and burdened.
I'd rather be Job in that case.
You'd rather be Job in that case? Okay. Even talking to clergies and ministers who are trained in grief and loss, because once again, the Bible is helpful, but even Jesus wept. And even Jesus allowed Mary and Martha to mourn the loss of Lazarus before he raised Lazarus from the dead. And so that personal touch makes a huge difference. I've got about 2 more pages worth of resources, but we want to see if we can make that available to you online in some kind of way, because there are things for everyone that they can have to deal with their grief and their hurt and their pain. No one need to suffer alone, not in this day and age. And as children of God, as a family and a community, we want to make sure and ensure that we care for those people who are hurting. Because when an uninvited guest comes in, you want to have a game plan so that you can usher that uninvited guest out.
And then sometimes, you have to be able to identify the guest, right?
Yes.
If you can't identify the guest, then you're not going to be able to know how to deal with them, right? Mm-hmm. And then another thing to take into consideration and to recognize and realize is that there's some grief that's never going to go away. Now, because it's always going to be there, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't thrive alongside of your grief, but there's just some of it that's not going to go away. You lose a parent, right? Yep. Every time you have an anniversary, a milestone event in your life that you would want your parent to be there for, it can feel like you're opening the wound and you're re-grieving that parent all over again, right? You lose a child. Every time you see another child or the anniversary of where they would be, or someone else's milestone is coming up, you're going to have that come up again. So this idea that grief is something to get over, or grief is this guest that we want to get out, I think we need to reframe that a little bit.
Reframe.
Right, because sometimes grief is the guest that is just going to be sitting over there chilling in the corner, and he's there. You give him some water when he's thirsty. You give him some food when he's hungry, and you know that he's just going to be over there chilling. Sometimes he's going to come and make a ruckus and make his
she.
presence known, he or she,
Or
right?
she.
He or
Gender
she.
inclusive.
Okay, well, let's they.
Yeah, they.
Sometimes they are going to come up, and make a ruckus and let you know that they're there. And then other times they're just going to be there laying and sleeping in the corner. It's not necessarily the guest that you want to get out, but it's definitely the guest that you want to recognize when they are there and give them what they need so that they can be at peace.
So true. So true. Well, thank you for that. Any final thoughts, Alex, Quan?
You know, when I came into the school district, I came into as a emotional behavior disorder specialist. Then I moved up to an assistant teacher, being a peer mentor. So I would say I was thrust, like, no warning. 'Cause I remember my first day, I had to go to a home visit at a hotel with a family, and it was very disturbing. But I prayed every time I came in. I prayed, had a praise session in the car before I went in. Grief, we don't want it there, but, to be honest, sometimes you'd like it to be there. You'd like to throw a little pity party. Not pity party, but you like to, say what you wouldn't say to yourself sometimes. But when grief leaves and it comes back, every time you must understand the stages and how to fight it if you want to, because sometimes people don't want to fight it. I believe grief has siblings. I believe that there's different stages of grief, and I think that you have to pray and take it day by day and just be intentional with yourself and the others, and grief may move out and stop paying rent, or it may just be there with you, for a lifetime. But I would say the biggest thing to take away from today would be intentionality and just being intentional. If you have problems with intentionality, let people know it, or pray about it. I would say pray about it and take that step towards it.
Okay. Quan, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Yes, I guess I would say remember to whom your help does come. You're not going to be able to fight it alone. A situation is a situation. It's too long of a word for you to handle by yourself. And look to the person who, like was previously said, look to the person who understands said grief and be able to help you through it. It isn't though as if he didn't lose a child himself. He gave his child for all of us, and he stood there helpless because Jesus said, "I'm going to take one for the team," and he's been through. I'm not going to compare grief, but he's been through grief almost as we have, and he's able to assist us because he knows. We have not a God who has been untouched by mortal trials, temptations, tribulation. He absolutely does know, and I think on the Christian note, sometimes I know it's definitely hard. You don't want to talk to God about certain things. You're not gonna know. God is too, but. But it is if you talk to him now or you talk to him later, you're still going to be in the situation. So however long it takes you, buckle up and say, all right, we're gonna sit and we're gonna wrestle through this, and I'm gonna. And it's not wrong for you to feel necessary grief. It's just that he will help you through it. It's not wrong for you to feel angry. It's not wrong for you to feel these different emotions that you go through. It's just that you need somebody to be there to assist you, to help you with it.
Right.
The best person to do that is Christ.
Amen. And thank you. Thank you, Quan. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Joel-Ann. As we're signing off, I want to share with you 3 quick resources, and then I will be gone. But that's the Verrett Ministry podcast. I found that podcast to be very powerful, and I encourage you to take a look at it. It's verrettministry.com podcast. I think on Spotify. Centerforloss.com is one. It's very powerful. It gives you a lot of information. And then Evolve Spirit, Body, and Mind. EvolveSpiritBodyMind.com. another resource. So there's some help out there for you to not only learn, but to reach out. We want to thank you all for sticking with us. To make sure, wish you all the best, and for the next episode and next segment of Shaking It Up.